Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us for this last webinar with Sister Nazi. As you know, those of you who follow us, we've been doing a webinar series on Islamic, a Muslim American heritage, or Muslim heritage in the US. And Sister Nazi has been very helpful. She's an author and a teacher, and she's been very helpful with trying to get us to connect with the American history in the US, and that we have roots in this country, Muslim Americans, from even before the establishment of the country as we know today as the United States of America. So you can view those videos on our website, icnacsj.org, right here, or you can go to our YouTube page, icnacsj.org/TV, and you can find her videos there, the past two episodes, basically. Today's going to be her last episode. She recently just published a book. You can find it on Amazon. It's called Islamic American Heritage, Discovery, Exploration, and what was the last word, Sister Nazi?
Colonization.
And colonization, yes. Um, and you can find it on Amazon. It was just published. It's going to be a three-part series. The first one is already on Amazon. The other two she'll be putting out shortly afterwards as well. So further ado, I'm going to hand it to Sister Nazi. So today's topic, she's going to talk about the Civil War and the Muslim contributions during the Civil War and how Muslims were part of the Civil War as well. And so there's something new to learn this week. So we ask everyone to pay attention and, and maybe write down these notes if you need to. And again, the video will be available after it's completed on our YouTube channel, and we'll put it on our website tomorrow as well. So, Sister Nazi, take it from here.
All right. Thank you very much, Brother Ramiz. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my screen share. All right, so this webinar, the third webinar, we're going to talk about the Muslim contributions during the Civil War era. This would be what I.
Before you continue, I just wanted to tell you, so you can't play it. It won't because it went back to your camera. You can't play it. You have to just share it as a screen. That's it, because the software that is not compatible with it. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. So let me try it again.
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, just leave it like that, and you can go through the slides. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So as Brother Rami says, this is the third webinar. The other two webinars, I think it would be important for you to check those out maybe after you watch this one. The first one, I kind of tell you a little bit more about myself, and I also tell how I got interested in this topic, and also some stories about some Muslims that lived during the colonial period. In the second webinar, I talk more about the way that Islam had influenced our founding fathers. So in this one, I hope to talk about the way Islam had made contributions to the Civil War era in the history of the United States. As I was saying, this is the time between 1850 and 1876. And if you saw any of my previous webinars, I do like to give you a little bit of historical context with each story I tell so that you understand the story within that historical context. So the first context or historical background piece of information that I'd like to share with you is the idea of the westward expansion. So a major challenge of the time was the westward expansion. And in 1845, Texas was annexed to the United States, and journalists began referring to the statehood of Texas or the annexation of Texas with a term called manifest destiny. And this term was used to describe Americans' belief that God's manifest destiny, that it was God's manifest destiny for the U.S. to eventually come to govern all of the territory between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And also along with this idea, Abraham Lincoln came to establish the Homestead Act of 1862. This act encouraged people to settle those Western territories by giving them plots of land if they were able to prove that they could live on the land for 5 years and if they could pay a small fee for it. Of course, a lot of people were really excited about being able to potentially own their own land, but they didn't realize how hard it would be to settle these very uncharted territories. So this also led to the need for transcontinental railroads, which also became a big topic of discussion at the time. Another trend of the time was statehood. As many Western territories were becoming populated with new settlers, they began to apply for statehood. And you can see a little map I provided there of what the United States looked like at the time. The last 4 states to achieve statehood before the Civil War were California, Minnesota, Oregon, and Kansas. And the statehood of these new territories had posed certain kinds of complications for the United States. First, California and Oregon were not physically annexed to the continuous United States. Between these states and the continuous United States was a lot of uncharted territory. This made it difficult for the United States to potentially protect the citizens of these new states. They didn't have any way to send California or Oregon things like arms for protection or food, or even a really good way to send communication to those areas. So the first story I'm going to tell you about is in the context of that Westward movement. It's the story of the US Army's Camel Corps. The Camel Corps was created in 1853 under President Pierce, who appointed a man named Jefferson Davis as the Secretary of War. Jefferson Davis had this idea of creating a Camel Corps to create a route from Texas to California. The federal government gave him $30,000 to fund the project, but he only used $10,000 of that. He was kind of proud of that. He used the money to purchase a total of about 77 camels and hire about 8 camel drivers who were of Turkish and Greek descent. In the first mission, Jefferson Davis made a base for the Camel Corps in a place called Camp Verde, Texas. The first mission was completed by a man named Edward Beale, who used 25 camels to take supplies to Fort Defiance in California. The rest of the camels were used for reconnaissance or surveying of the Southwest. The reconnaissance work led to the United States being able to build railroads through the Southwest. So the Camel Corps was very important to the development of the westward expansion. The lead camel driver of the US Camel Corps was a Muslim man named Haji Ali. He was born to a Syrian father and a Greek Christian mother. And as a young teen, he converted to Islam and completed the pilgrimage to Mecca. His birth name was Philip Tedrow, but he preferred his Muslim name and title of Haji Ali. The Southerners could not pronounce his name, so they called him Haji Ali. Haji Ali was described by his friends as having kneeled regularly to pray, and they also noted that he fasted even in the heat of Texas and Arizona. Now, a camel driver who worked in the US Camel Corps would have been paid $50 a month for food and lodging. So this is not much more than minimum wage would be today. Managing the camels in the rocky soil of the Southwest was also very difficult because the camels were not accustomed to the rocky soil of the Southwest. It would hurt their hooves. And Haji Ali had a very special relationship with his camels. He cared so much about them that he used to actually even put burlap on their feet to protect their hooves, but this didn't help too much. And he showed us how much he cared about them because he would give them affectionate names. They had both Arabic and English names, and he even named one of them Uncle Sam. Haji Ali eventually got married and had 3 children, and as a camel driver, he would have spent many long months away from his family. To make matters worse, even though he gave about 30 years of his life surveying the land for the US Army, he was not honored by a military pension because he was considered a contractor. He also died a poor man in 1902 in a place called Quartzsite, Arizona. And Haji Ali was not the only Muslim camel driver in the US Camel Corps. There were also men with names like Muhammad Marwan, Muhammad Aymar, Salim Abu Agnam, Ali Aglu Suleiman, Mustafa Aglu Hassam. Most of those men, however, returned home when given the opportunity, but Haji Ali chose to stay. Some say he chose to stay because he had married and had children in the United States. Sadly, the US Camel Corps was abandoned at the start of the Civil War. So Haji Ali is widely celebrated in American culture. Arizona's governor, Benjamin Moore, dedicated a memorial to Haji Ali in Quartzsite, Arizona, where he was buried in 1935. The site has become part of the National Registry of Historical Landmarks, and there are tours that take people to go see the site. If you want to see it, it's located between Phoenix, Arizona and Los Angeles along Route 10. I'd love to see pictures if anyone wants to put them on Facebook or send them to me if you happen to go there. Another way that Haji Ali's life was celebrated was through a Disney movie called Humps. The movie told the story of the US Camel Corps, and it also did feature the character of Haji Ali as well. If you're as old as I am, you'll remember the dog Benji, who starred in several Disney movies at the time, including this one. If you're from Arizona, you may have heard of the legend of the Red Ghost, or the Ghost Rider. This legend tells of a camel that roamed the Arizona desert with a corpse on his back. And today, all over Arizona and Texas, many people still tell stories about how they saw ghost camels or they see camels roaming in the desert. There's even a country song by a man named Randy Sparks that tells the story of Haji Ali, and I recorded a sample of that song for you to listen to. I know the sound quality is not that great, but if you can't hear it that well, you can also just go ahead and Google it after the webinar and listen to the whole thing, but here's a sample. So the song, if you couldn't hear the words, is basically, hi jolly, hey jolly, 20 miles today by golly, 20 more before the morning light. Hi jolly, yeah jolly, gotta be on my way. I told my girl I'd be home Sunday night. So going on to the next theme of the era, and that is, of course, slavery. Each state, as it was becoming a state, had to take a position on slavery. And this was dividing the country. You may have recalled that I had mentioned that Kansas was the last state to become a state before the Civil War. And Kansas's statehood rekindled the issue of slavery. Some wanted Kansas to be a slave state, while others did not. And the topic became so heated that many lost their lives over the issue, and Kansas was coined Bleeding Kansas because of all the blood that was shed. Also, Northerners were becoming embarrassed because the United States was continuing to practice slavery long after many other countries, specifically the Barbary countries of North Africa, had ended slavery. And finally, many abolitionists saw the end of slavery as the last frontier to achieving the full realization of the ideals that this country was established on. These were the ideas of things such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So a lot of what has been happening in the politics in the what was happening in the politics of the U.S. at the time had to do with comparing the U.S. laws and civil rights to that of the rest of the world. The greatest enemy of the United States were the Berber Muslims because they had taken whites and taken them to be slaves in North Africa. They were seen as pirates, and America had its first war with the Barbary states. So the practice that Muslims had in the Barbary states of taking Christians and making Christian white people and making them slaves led to a lot of hatred by Christian whites. And that hatred has endured even to this day. It's caused a lot of misunderstandings about the views of slavery that existed then. First of all, slavery was practiced all over the world, not just in North Africa or in the United States. Many Christians misinterpret the Quran to say that Islam ordained slavery or encouraged it, but this is not actually true. In fact, Islam put limits on slavery, on the slavery that was already being practiced. Many Americans also think that when we say that Muslims had slavery, that they think that it was the same kind of slavery that the people practiced in the South in the US with the African slaves. And there were a lot of differences. So here are some of the differences between slavery under Islam and slavery among the US African slaves. In Islam, slavery, you become a slave as a result of being a prisoner of war. But in the southern United States, you usually became a slave because of some kind of covert capture. You maybe had, or just living your life in Africa and someone snuck up on you and grabbed you and took you to the United States on a ship without any war. In Islam, there is a way for slaves to earn their freedom. And slaves have that right to be able to have the opportunity to earn their freedom. But in the southern United States, not only were you a slave for life, your descendants were also slaves for life. Islam encouraged the humane treatment of slaves, but in the South, the slaves were treated very inhumanely. And in the South, in Islam, if you were not a Muslim, you were allowed to keep your religion and your identity, like your name. However, in the South, people were forced to convert and often change their name and their identity. Under Islam, other Muslims could not be enslaved. But in the South, enslavement was based on race alone, something you absolutely could not change. So there were a lot of abolitionists at the time that sort of knew about these differences between the ways slavery was practiced in the South and the way it was practiced in other places in the world, like in Muslim countries. One of these abolitionists was named Theodore Dwight Jr. He came from a long line of abolitionists, and his second cousin was Theodore Dwight Weld, who wrote he wrote a book called Slavery as It Is. And this book is said to have been the inspiration for Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And we all know how important that book was to the end of influencing the end of slavery. Theodore Dwight Jr. wrote several books describing the accounts of slaves, and many of those slaves were Muslim. He learned so much from these slaves that he decided to collect Arabic texts, and he attempted to have them translated. The biggest effect that he had was that he shattered the popular idea that slaves came from uncivilized societies. Instead, he described them as having come from great civilizations of Mohammedism. So another abolitionist was a man named Charles Sumner. And this is a very iconic story that led up to the Civil War, the caning of Charles Sumner. And this story demonstrates the tension that existed before the Civil War on the topic of slavery. The story takes place on the Senate floor. Charles Sumner was the US Senator from Massachusetts. He was known for his harsh criticism of the South for its practice of slavery. In speeches leading up to the Civil War, Charles Sumner quoted the Qur'an in order to criticize the Southerners' practice of slavery. He quoted Surah 24, Ayah 33, which speaks of redemption for slaves. Redemption is that idea that a slave could request a written agreement or document that would explain how he could earn his own freedom. Sumner criticized the Southerners by saying that they were worse than Muslims, and of course the Southern Christians thought Muslims were terrible. He preached that Muslims could be actually an example for the Southerners because of their practice of redemption. He also told them how Muslims allowed their white slaves to continue practicing Christianity while Southern slave owners were forced conversion of their slaves. In addition, he gave examples of how Muslim slaves were well-dressed, well-fed, and given opportunities to even advance in honor. His quote was, and this is his quote of the Quran. He said, "And unto such your slaves, says the Quran, in words worthy of adoption in the legislation of Christian countries, as desire a written instrument, allowing them to redeem themselves on paying a certain sum, write one, if you know good in them, and give them the riches of God, which he hath given you." Thus from the Quran, which ordains slavery, comes lessons of benignity to the slave, and one of the most touching stories in Mohammedanism is the generosity of Ali, the companion of the Prophet, who after fasting for 3 days gave his whole provision to a captive not more famished than himself. And that was his whole quote. Then one day on May 19th, 1856, Sumner gave a 5-hour-long fiery speech called The Crime Against Kansas. In that speech, he insulted Senator Andrew Butler from South Carolina so harshly that his insults nearly cost him his life. This is what he said. He said, "The senator from South Carolina has read many books on chivalry and believes himself a chivalrous knight with sentiments of honor and courage. Of course, he has chosen a mistress to whom he has made his vows, and who, though ugly to others, is always lovely to him, though polluted in the sight of the world, is chaste in his sight. I mean the harlot slavery." In this quote, he's criticizing the Southerners for the practice of enslaving their own flesh and blood, their own children. These children were the product of their relations with their slaves. Sumner knew that in Islam, a Muslim man was not allowed to enslave his own child, even if the child's mother was a slave. The speech was so insulting that Senator Brooks, the second cousin of Senator Butler, took it upon himself to approach Senator Sumner on the Senate floor after the Senate was not in session. He came up from behind him so he could not see him coming, and he started to strike the senator on the head repeatedly with his cane. Sumner was so badly injured that he had to take leave from the Senate for 3 years. The event further divided the North and the South. And while the North saw Senator Sumner as a potential martyr, the South showed their solidarity with Senator Butler by wearing pieces of the broken cane on strings around their neck. So during the Civil War, Muslim leaders praised Abraham Lincoln for signing the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. In 1864, Hossein Pasha, the Tunisian general and leader of the Ottoman Empire, sent letters to the Secretary of State of the US asking him to eliminate slavery in the name of humanity. This resulted in several executive documents that were exchanged between the US House of Representatives and the Ottoman Empire discussing slavery, the immorality of slavery. And the fact that the Tunisians were bragging about having ended slavery before the US was just more a sense of embarrassment for the US Congress members. From this interaction, though, the Congress did learn about Islamic policies on slavery. And a congressman from Massachusetts named Horace Mann, who is well known for his advocacy and education, quoted a hadith on the House floor in the context of this interaction. He said, "The Bey of Tunis, acting under the light of the Mohammedan religion, has abolished it," meaning slavery. The priests of Persia declare the sentiment to have come by a tradition from Muhammad himself, basically saying that he said, "The worst of men is the seller of men." So this brings us to the next theme that I would like to talk about, and that is the lives of some of the Muslim soldiers in the Civil War. So I want to start by explaining how some of these Muslim soldiers may have come to the United States. There are more than 200 people who are documented with Muslim names, Muslim sounding names, that enlisted in the Civil War. These included names like Amin, Muhammad, Mateen, Naim, Rahman, Saba, and Saeed. So where did all the Muslims come from, and how did they end up in the US? Well, we don't really exactly know, but I have a couple of theories. First of all, although most of the US immigrants at the time were coming from Germany and Ireland, there also were a few immigrants that came from East Asia. When England abolished slavery in 1838, it left a labor void in the West Indies and the Caribbean. And this caused the farmers of the West Indies to try to fill that void with what they would refer to as neo-slavery today. And there was a slavery of people from India. And many people in India were living in poverty, and they were tricked into slavery because they thought they were being offered good jobs overseas. Instead, they were subjected to harsh indentured servitude. And some of them probably realized that when they were tricked and tried to escape. And it's reasonable to believe that some of the soldiers may have been those who escaped this slavery in the West Indies and the Caribbean. This isn't the only reason why people may have come to the United States. The gold rush of 1845 also attracted people from around the world, including many of the first Chinese immigrants. The Western territories also offered a lot of opportunities for a new life. And even though these immigrants faced a lot of discrimination for their race in the US, because of the Civil War, there was talk of a hope for a better future, and especially a better economic future, than was in their own countries. So one of the people that probably fit this category was Private Muhammad Khan. Of the people who were in the Civil War that had Muslim names, about 18 of them have pension files. And this is one of those pension applications that from Private Muhammad Khan. So he was from Afghanistan, and soon after immigrating to the United States, he joined the 43rd New York Infantry Regiment. And a few days after participating in the Battle of Gettysburg, he became separated from his regiment. He was arrested in Hagerstown, Maryland, and sent to work with slaves in Pennsylvania because the other Union soldiers thought that he was a slave since he had appeared to be of color. And after a year of searching for his regiment, he heard about a train that was carrying his regiment, and he escaped and boarded the train to rejoin his regiment just in time to fight in the Battle of Spotsylvania, Virginia. At that battle, he sustained a gunshot wound to his hand. And then he spent the rest of his time in the Civil War as a sharpshooter. One of the most famous Muslim soldiers of the Civil War was a man named Nicholas Said. And the thing that's special about him is that he has an autobiography that has been preserved. And also, one of the biggest misunderstandings about Nicholas Said is that he came to the US as a slave. He actually came to the US as a freed man. So although Nicholas Said lived much of his life as a slave, he was never actually a slave in the US. He was born Muhammad Ali bin Said in Sudan, and he first became a slave when he was captured by Abdul al-Qadir, and you may have heard of him. He was a big Arab slave trader, a big Arab slave trader. When his village was attacked by Abdul Qadir. And Said was then sold to a man named Haji Dawood, and he accompanied Haji Dawood on a trip to Mecca to perform the Hajj. Dawood took him to Constantinople after they finished the Hajj, and he sold him to a Russian diplomat. The diplomat put him to work for a Russian prince, and that's where he met the Tsar. He was offered his freedom under the condition that he be baptized, and that's when his name was changed to Nicholas Said. Of course, Nicholas Said didn't have any choice or opportunity to practice Islam, but he did take the opportunity in his autobiography to criticize Christians for thinking that Muslims were infidels. After gaining his freedom, he was given money to return home, and there someone talked him into traveling to New Guinea. So if you don't know where New Guinea is, that's actually in the northern part of South America. And once he was in New Guinea, someone convinced him to travel to the United States. In the United States, he taught children in Detroit to speak French. Later, he traveled to South Carolina and Alabama. He did not write that much about his experiences in the Civil War, but he did say in his autobiography that he was not initially allowed to join the Civil War because of his race. But after they allowed African Americans to join the Civil War, he joined the 55th Massachusetts Regiment, which was fought in South Carolina. And these soldiers were used for what's called picket duty. Soldiers on picket duty generally went ahead of the other regiments, and they acted as scouts. They would dig trenches and prepare the battlegrounds before the battle. Nicholas Said was overall interested in restoring the image of his race. He stated that Africa was misrepresented and as a place absent of culture and industry. He wrote that he wanted to render himself useful to the people of his race. So the most interesting thing about Nicholas Said was that he traveled to 5 continents and spoke at least 6 languages, only to end up in the US as a freedman. So the next story brings us towards the end of the Civil War. In the end of the Civil War, the North used siege warfare and ordered every government building in the South to be burned to the ground. The University of Alabama was no exception. It was considered to be a government building of the South because its campus was used to train Confederate soldiers. The campus was known for its fine library, and at the heart of the library stood the rotunda, where the most prized books were kept. The library housed some 7,000 books, as well as the university's natural history collection. The Union soldiers were met at the rotunda of the library by the librarian, a Frenchman named André de Loffre. He begged Colonel Thomas Johnston to spare the library. His request was sent to Colonel Coxton, but it was denied. So then André de Loffre begged Colonel Johnston to spare just the rotunda of the library, and that request was also denied. No one knows how, but impressively, only one book was saved from the library, and this was the copy of Sale's translation of the Holy Qur'an. So, in trying to investigate why they would have picked the Qur'an as the only book that they would have saved, the curator of the University of Alabama explains that there was a sort of an infatuation with other religions at the time, including Islam. So I have the theory that this infatuation was probably influenced by the writings of Washington Irving. Washington Irving became America's first best-selling author. He's most famous for stories such as Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. However, what many people do not know about him is that he spent many years as a diplomat in Spain. This role gave him access to the library of the Spanish consulate, where he was able to read many stories about Islamic Spain. In 1850, Irving published the first biography of the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in English. This book was named The Life of Muhammad and His Successors. The other books about Islamic Spain included Tales of a Traveler, Tales of Alhambra, and Tales of Granada. And if you have been to Texas, we have a town called Irving, Texas, where one of the biggest mosques is there. And all of the neighborhoods in the area are called Granada, Alhambra. Some of the names are named after Muslim scientists like Al-Biruni Street. And I used to think that the names of the neighborhoods were inspired by the mosque, since the mosque is sort of in the middle of all of that. But then I came to realize that they were actually inspired by the town, by Washington Irving, for which the town was named after. So also at the end of the Civil War, the people were excited to celebrate the end of slavery. So the Statue of Liberty marks, the last story I want to send you with is the story of the design of the Statue of Liberty. Now, you may have heard the Statue of Liberty was originally designed to be a Muslim woman with a hijab. And this is true, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the details of the story. The sculptor of Frederick Bartholdi first developed the idea of building a large statue when he was inspired by visiting the colossal statues of pharaohs in Egypt. In 1854, Egypt began building the Suez Canal, and it was completed in 1869. Bartholdi had the idea to build a statue of a fellah woman to guard the entry of the canal. The fellah were Muslim Egyptian slaves who gave their lives to build most of the canal. Just before the canal was finished, they revolted, and basically Egypt was forced to spend lots of money on some steam-powered machines to finish the job. So Bartholdi's idea was to name the statue Egypt Bringing Light unto Asia. But Egypt refused to spend the money for the statue, and after spending so much money to build the canal. After failing to sell his idea to Egypt, he met a Frenchman named Edward de La Broglie, a prominent thinker of the time. He was the president of the French Anti-Slavery Society. La Broglie had the idea of raising money to gift the United States a statue to celebrate 100 years of friendship with France and the end of slavery in the United States. He thought that the gift would strengthen France's democracy and enlightened ideas of liberty. So one of the misconceptions about the Statue of Liberty was that it was actually a gift from the government of France. And it was not a gift from the government of France, but from just private citizens in France. And the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty actually was from a nonprofit organization of donors in the United States. So it was sort of a joint effort to build the Statue of Liberty. But here in the picture, you can see what the original design was, how it looked with a fellow woman, and they had to change it to a Greek goddess. So, of course, the Statue of Liberty marks the beginning of another era of immigration. That was a big wave of immigration that started in the late 1800s. And although you mostly hear of the Scottish and Irish, Polish immigrants, Muslims were also among those immigrants. Syrian immigrants are believed to have arrived in America as early as 1890 and settled in places in Michigan, Indiana as factory workers building railroad cars and sewage pipes. Eventually, they came to work for the Ford factories and building the U.S.'s first automobiles. So this brings us to the end of this era of Muslims in the United States. I hope you can see that Muslims never stopped being part of United States history. And it's important to remember that as you're studying the history of the United States, you also keep up with current events that go along with this history. So I just wanted to go ahead and recognize that those some current events that have recently happened in the last election. We have now elected the first 2 women to the House of Representatives, Muslim women to the House of Representatives. That was Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. And Keith Ellison has become the first Muslim Attorney General. And we also had someone attempting to become the first Muslim governor in the United States. So this is a big trend right now in American history, that Muslims do want their voices heard and do want everyone to know that we've been here all along. So just to give you a reminder, my book, the volume 1 of this book, it is a textbook for Muslim Sunday schools. It is laid out with activities, questions, homework, that kind of thing. And it's available on Amazon. You can also go to my website, www.islamicschoolresources.com, if you want to see also some supplemental materials that go along with the book. So I'm going to give this back to Brother Rabi, and then we're going to end this.
Okay, thank you so much, Sister Nazi. So the recording is available. We urge you all to please share it with your family and your friends. And again, this information is very important. There's a lot of questioning from amongst Muslim haters out there who question the validity of Muslims in this country and think we only came here a few decades ago. But that's not true, as Sister Nazi has continuously supported through evidence that we've been here for a long time. Our influence has been here for a long time, and we're just as part of the fabric of this nation as anyone else. So please share it, review it, and just let us know in the comments section if you liked it or not. And
I also was going to say to go ahead and post your questions, and I'll check the Facebook page and answer the questions in the comments section if you have questions. Do my best to do that.
Yes, yes. I think she meant YouTube. On YouTube, on Facebook too. I think you follow us on Facebook as well. Mm-hmm. So you can send her. You can put the questions in the video below, and she'll go through it and she'll answer it in the next 24 hours. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully, we'll bring you another webinar on another topic related to social justice. Just last week, not last week, but last month, we just did a webinar with the Uyghur Muslims who are being persecuted in China. So please check those out too as well. It was a very good interview with the brother from their community who came out and gave a very thorough discussion on what's happening. So please check that out.
I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank ICNA for giving me the opportunity to present these webinars. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Jazakallah.
And last, so you can view all of our videos on icnacsj.org/TV. If you put that link in, it'll take you to all of the videos on our YouTube channel that we've published. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.